All right, so we are going to be letting people join, and then I'm going to be talking a little bit about Reserva, the Youth Land Trust, and what we do in particular that is a little different fundraising wise, and how that might be able to apply to other people who are in a similar situation as us, whether you're a small nonprofit or a young nonprofit or a nonprofit that focuses on a different group of people. For us, it's youth. And then later on, we'll be speaking with Selena Chen, who's with us right now on this webinar. Selena is a youth council member for Reserva, and she is a wildlife photographer, biologist. You're gonna have to probably give your own intro, Selena. And then there is later on, we're going to be joined by two really cool people. We'll have Paul Goodenough, who is the founder of a project called Rewriting Extinction, that is a collaborative fundraising initiative that pairs creators, comic book writers, and celebrities, people with a passion for the environment and a big platform, and they create comics together and put them out and drive the readers to donate to this Rewriting Extinction platform that is supporting Reserva, as well as 6 other environmental NGOs. So that's I'm excited to talk to Paul. It's a really interesting model that's very unusual, especially seeing this like cross NGO collaboration in supporting it. So we'll be joined by him later. And then at the end, we'll wrap up with a chat with Javier Roballo, who's the executive director of Fundación EcoMinga. It's an Ecuadorian organization that's protecting forests, especially cloud forests in the Andean Chocó. And in fact, the picture behind me, the picture behind Selena, this is the area that we are protecting with them. And we're going to talk to Javier about, okay, like once we've raised this money, where is it going? Where do you actually need the funds the most? And what funds are kind of long-term, difficult to raise funds for the continuity of the organization versus funds that are needed, for a particular project. I'm sure that there are folks in the audience who are in this environmental fundraising world. You'll be very familiar with project-based funding versus general operating support. And the fundraising that you need to do it is very different. I already see a few questions in the chat, and so I'm going to dive straight into a presentation, and I will answer that along the way. Okay, and I'll show you where we work in the Ecuadorian Chocó. All right, so I am going to screen share here. So first of all, thank you everyone for coming. I know this kind of went out at the last minute, and we got this posted at the last minute. So thank you for making the time and joining us. We'll try to have fun. Please put your questions in the chat or comments, and we'll definitely get to them. So, all right. Play slideshow. Okay, Selena, can you see this? Just want to make sure.
Yep, I can see it.
All right, so what we're talking about today is innovative fundraising for environmental NGOs. It goes, we're going to talk about what do you do beyond getting big grants or major donors, because as probably many of you in the audience will know, that's not always accessible to a new organization, a young organization. And so what are the other things that we can do to support our work? So, but first, if there's anyone in the audience who's thinking of starting an organization, I just want to start with this, this thought. It's not always the right answer to start an organization. This is the thought process that I used when I started Reserva, and I'll talk about Reserva in a sec. But the thought process that I like to go through and to recommend others do as well is first you think, what is the problem that you want to solve? Devise a solution to that problem, and then ask yourself, is anyone already doing this? because if they are working on that exact solution that you want to solve, it is more efficient to support them, support an existing organization. If there's no one doing what you want to do, then it's time to start a new organization. That's going to be your best bet. In our case, we are doing something that's similar to what a lot of other organizations are doing. There are other really impressive and efficient environmental NGOs conserving habitat around the globe. But the difference was that none of them focus on youth donors as their sole focus, and do everything through the lens of youth empowerment. So because there was no one doing that, I wound up just saying, well, okay, we've got to start an organization then. And then it's not super easy just to start a charity, especially if you're based in the US. It's very complicated. So the last thing to ask yourself is, are you ready to do it full time? And are you comfortable with administrative work? Because if you're not, if you don't have a little bit of financial cushion to be able to do it full time and know you might not have any funding right away, then it's probably not your best bet to just go ahead and start a charity. It's a ton of administrative work and it can be really, really time consuming. But there are other things that you can do to do your mission-based work without having to start a tax-exempt charity organization. So in the US and in most other countries, you can just start a simple business unit. And in the US, it's an LLC, a limited liability company. And if you need to be able to accept donations to do your work, in the US, you can use what's called a fiscal sponsorship. And I'll mention a little bit about that later, because we actually used a fiscal sponsorship in the beginning. But if you don't need to be able to accept donations that are tax deductible, if people don't mind throwing you $5 or $10 and they don't need a tax receipt for it and they're happy to not be able to write it off on their taxes, you don't even need to do that. You can just get going right away. So all that is to say, a lot of what I'm going to talk about later is really going to apply if you are a charity with tax exempt status, but certainly all of these kind of creative and innovative things that we do, they'll work even if you don't have your charity status as well. So we are an organization that empowers young people to make a measurable difference for the threatened species and habitats through conservation, education, and storytelling. And it's important to have a really clear mission that tells exactly what you're trying to do and differentiates you from the other organizations in your field. It's really helpful to have a clear mission statement on grant applications and all that kind of stuff, but mainly for your donors and your funders to understand what they're giving to. So just a little bit about us before we get into the context of how we fund what we do. So we organized about 2 years ago as a youth-led organization, and around this flagship project, the idea of creating the world's first entirely youth-funded nature reserve. And it's kind of a crazy idea. I was working at National Geographic for the previous 7 years in the National Geographic Kids unit, and I had been volunteering on the Rainforest Trust Council for a few years as well. And I realized that there was this gap between youth activism for the environment and kids and their passion for the environment and their ability to do something, these tried and true methods of biodiversity conservation that have traditionally been kind of gatekept for older, wealthier people. And these organizations that do this really well haven't traditionally chased young donors because, frankly, like it's just a different model than chasing people who have a salary. So we wanted to create a youth-funded reserve. This is it, and this black arrow to the person who asked in the chat is pointing to where we are in Ecuador. It is literally on the border, like exactly on the Colombian border. If you see in this picture of the bottom right, these are called the Peñas Blancas, the white rocks. This is where our site begins. And over the back ridge of this this mountain range, and kind of off to the top right-hand corner, that's the Colombian border. So we are right there, and it's in an area called the Chocó. And so many of you will have heard of the Amazon. That's the big one off to the right. But this left part of Ecuador on the west, it's in the Andes mountain range. And it's got a really interesting climate because the ocean pushes all this ocean air over and then hits a really tall mountain range in the Andes and creates lowland rainforest at the bottom. And then as you go up the slopes, you get into cloud forest elevation. And because of these this really unique climatic zone, this area is one of the most biodiverse areas in the world and one of the most endemic areas in the world, meaning the species that live here live nowhere else. And what's really kind of pressing about that and urgent about the work that we're doing there is that in Ecuador, only 2% of the Ecuadorian Chocó rainforest, the lowland rainforest, remains intact. And the cloud forest habitat is not far behind that. It's harder to estimate because of the cloud coverage, but potentially 10%, maybe a little higher. So we are working to protect that area. It's about 244 acres. And before I kind of continue to blab on, I thought I would show you what it looks like in real time. So this is our site. And to get up to the beginning of the site, we have to walk up the left-hand edge of this cliff. And it is about half a mile, or maybe close to a mile to get to the top. And it takes about 6 hours. So the terrain, just the intensity of this hike, it's exhausting. It's completely grueling. And it makes it a little slower because you have to stop to photograph really incredible species along the way. So we have been supporting our partner who they do scientific research on the site. This is their bird monitoring program. And they employ local and indigenous people to help them understand and study the animals and plants that live on this site. One of the most important programs that they have is studying the reptiles and amphibians, the herps. This is Atelopus coine. It's a harlequin toad. It's critically endangered. And this is one of the only places in the world where it lives. It's the only place in the world where it's protected. It is about the size of, maybe twice the size of your thumbnail, kind of that last joint on your thumb. And so our work is coming down to photograph, film, and support the scientists as they research these species. This is another endangered toad called Rebocolomai. And again, was thought extinct, this is it as a baby. It was thought extinct for about 30 years and only recently rediscovered living on this site. So we support our partner on storytelling, with storytelling on these research expeditions, because prior to our involvement, the best you would get out of there were some few DSLR photos, some cool cell phone photos. But when you bring young people who know how to use media, people like me, I'm a wildlife photographer, and we can capture, like really spend time capturing stories that we can share with people who care. It's a great way to get a whole new audience involved in supporting your work. So that's just a quick little overview of what we do while we're there. This is Pearson. He's a herpetologist, always catching frogs. But really, this work is not possible without partnerships. So the way that we have funded this reserve is, and I just want to be very clear, we are not purchasing the land. We work with Rainforest Trust, is our partner here in the US. They match every dollar we bring in. And then that money goes directly to Fundación EcoMinga, which is an organization in Ecuador that works to protect threatened forests. They focus on orchids as kind of a bioindicator for species density and biodiversity. So they look for areas of forest that have extremely high densities of orchids. And then, you know, when there are a lot of orchid species, that means there are a lot of insects that pollinate those orchids. And that means that there are a lot of amphibians that eat those insects and birds that eat those insects. And in this area with so much specialization, those orchids can really indicate that a certain patch of forest has the conditions to be a very species-rich zone. So we, speaking of biodiversity, we focus on areas that have high levels of biodiversity. This was our first project. We are intending to do a network of these youth-funded reserves around the globe, but our focus will always be on biodiverse areas. These are some of the species that live on our site. I've mentioned the toads. We have these incredible Dracula orchids that flower in the top. That's a Dracula orchid. It has these crazy, like, spiny petals. And that's what gives this reserve its name. It's called Dracula Reserve. Critically endangered monkeys and really cool birds and cats, pumas, spectacled bears, all the stuff. So all of this lives in this area, and that's our focus, is protecting the species-rich areas. And of course, it wouldn't be possible without this team. So not only are we trying to fund these, habitat, the purchase of habitat for these species, but part of our fundraising goes to support the salaries for these people. Don Hector, Don Nilo, Milton, Giovanni, David, Rolando, these are our protectors on the ground. They are our forest guards employed by EcoMinga and supported by Reserva, Orchid Conservation Alliance, Rainforest Trust, and the University of Basel in Switzerland. All of our work together helps fund their employment. So I want to kind of switch gears and talk about how we bring in money. So everyone on this call will probably be familiar with the traditional sources. You can go after grants, you can go after some fellowships that are available. That's a great opportunity. It's a great channel especially for people who are starting a new organization. Definitely look into fellowships that you might be eligible for. But the big grants can be really hard to get. Major donors can be really hard to get if you aren't already doing your work. And how do you do that work if you don't have any funding at all? So we started by using this group. I can't point to it, but the GEOS Foundation as our fiscal sponsor, basically working with an organization that already existed, that already had their charity status. And they said, you know what, your mission aligns with ours. It's a good one. We will accept donations on your behalf and then grant them to you. That enabled us to work with a lot of other groups that were willing to fund, but only if we had tax exempt status. We've also received funding support from Project Happy, which is a youth business in social media, management, led by young people who started this little company during quarantine, and they're one of our larger donors. La Neblina is a group of youth from Ecuador who organized around, after finding out about Reserva and what we were trying to do, they were like, wait, I didn't realize that young people could do something that tangible. Why aren't we doing that? And so they organized this really incredible organization called La Neblina and started having talks from Ecuadorian photographers about nature photography. And they sold tickets to those talks and raised over $2,000 for conservation through this project that we did together. So receiving little bits of support, whether it's $2,000 here and there, or a few $100 from events held by Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, for example, that money that comes in really goes a long way. And finding partners that are willing to fundraise for you or donate to you, even in just small quantities, is going to go a really, really long way. So the first thing to think about as you're kind of launching your initiative are the freebies, the in-kind support that they're kind of out there for you, just sort of waiting. If you are a small charity or you're thinking of starting one, you should definitely know about a few things. One is Google for nonprofits. Once you get a charity status in the US, that's that 501c3 status. Easier said than done. It takes a while. It's kind of expensive. It's a big hassle with the IRS, but once you have that charity status, you are eligible for Google for Nonprofits. You have to register through an organization called TechSoup, and then it takes literally a day. And once they approve you, that means you get the Google email workspace for free. You get Google ad grants, which is just kind of like the worst kept, best kept secret of nonprofits. Google ad grants is Google giving you $10,000 per month forever toward advertising in search on their search platform, so text search advertising. And there are a lot of hitches with that program. One is you have to follow all their silly little rules. And if you don't, they can kick you out and you'll never get your ads grants program back. So what I recommend is if you haven't gotten your Google ad grants, don't get it until you're ready. But once you are about, once you feel like you have a few days to put towards setting it up, there's a great book called the Google Ad Grants Playbook. Read that book. It takes like 5 hours and it will completely introduce you to everything that you need to take advantage of this program. So we spend now $329 per day on advertising at Google, and doesn't cost us a dime, and it never will. So Google for Nonprofits, it's one of the big freebies. As I mentioned, TechSoup, you have to register here to get Google for Nonprofits, but it has a lot of other really cool things that are kind of freebies as well. You get discounted access to Adobe for Creative Suite, to Dropbox, to QuickBooks, and important tip, if you haven't yet gotten a QuickBooks for your organization and you're waiting on your nonprofit status, wait until you get your status to get QuickBooks through TechSoup, because it's a huge discount, but you have to get it straight from the start as a nonprofit to get that discount. You can't like switch over to the discount later. So really cool stuff. Definitely explore TechSoup if you're thinking about getting any kind of programs as a nonprofit. And then the last kind of freebie one, I include this in in-kind support because one of the things that takes a lot of time as a charity in the US, and I assume this is similar overseas, is you need to acknowledge your donors officially as giving them tax receipts so that they can write these donations they give you off from their taxes. And PayPal Giving Fund is really neat because if you register for PayPal as a charity, just registering with them as a charity, it gives you discounted credit card fees when people donate to you. But if you go the extra step of being accepted into PayPal Giving Fund, which if you are a charity in good standing, you'll be accepted. PayPal Giving Fund will essentially act like a fiscal sponsor in that they accept donations on your behalf and then they grant them to you and they send those acknowledgements out to the donor. So you'll get all your donor information and everything, but with them covering that administrative cost of sending out those acknowledgements for you, it's actually a huge time saver. Definitely worth looking into if you are a charity. So our kind of secret sauce is our team. And it's not really a freebie, having a big volunteer set, but it is really helpful. I say it's not a freebie because it requires a lot of time on your part to manage a team of volunteers. Certainly the case with me, but it's 100,000 times % worth it. So you'll meet Selena in just a moment. She's one of our youth council members. This is our group of protectors from abroad. They live in, I think, 17 or 18 different countries. We have about 60 people on this team. They're all under the age of 26. And they work to lead our fundraising and kind of come up with ways to raise money that play on their strengths. And what's cool is that when you have a diverse group of volunteers, that means you get this diverse group of niche interest areas as well. Selena is going to talk about her kind of niche interest in fashion. It's not an area that we would normally have been able to reach into, just as a youth-led environmental nonprofit, but having a team that has their own interests, like Selena with fashion, it allows you to really branch out and find new people to be part of your team. So I'm going to kind of blitz through this so I can bring on Selena, and then we can bring on Paul and later Javier. But when I say youth funded, what does that actually mean? So for us, it means donations from young people, donations in honor, memory, or as a gift to a young person, donations that result from a kid, fundraising, grants or sponsorships that one of our youth council members have, devoted their own time and energy to getting. And then matching funds from partners that encourage youth donations. So these funds wouldn't go toward the project if not for the youth fundraising effort that's put in. And we also do fundraising. So for us, it's not just about raising money. It's equally about raising awareness. And you've probably seen people on Instagram, creators especially, saying, don't pay me with exposure. I need to be paid for real. Well, that's very true for creators. There is actually benefit to just exposure as a charity. The more people that know about you, the more, more ears you'll reach when you're actually trying to fundraise. So this was a really fun fundraising opportunity for us. We had the great opportunity to work with a group of herpetologists in Ecuador who discovered this new species of frog, that the highest population of this frog lives on our site in Ecuador. And they offered us the chance to name it, to give it a new, give a new species name. And most of the time when this is done, it's usually named in honor of a major donor, someone who's dedicated their life to conservation. Sometimes it's even auctioned off to the highest bidder. And so initially we thought, okay, this is a fundraising opportunity. But the more we thought about it, we thought about this in terms of who we are. And we want to bring in youth and empower young people to be directly connected with protecting nature. And we thought, what, if we put up a financial barrier for kids to be able to be involved in this process, that's not really us. So we opened a competition that was free to everyone to name this new species of frog. And we got 622 really incredible, unique, creative entries from 36 countries. And ultimately, we ended up with something like 50 or 80 finalists that we went through with a series, a group of judges. And it was so hard to choose the final because the winner, because so many of these entries were passionate and just really well explained and thought out. And so it was a great opportunity for us to meet kids and youth who were passionate about the area of work that we're in. Moving into actual fundraising, the ways that we've received donations is, once we've kind of broadened our horizons and gotten a lot of people into our network, this is how we get donations. We get donations directly from kids. They might not always be the biggest. This wound up being about $10 from Junia and Keanu to new youth council members from from India. And this was all of their chore money. Kids, I think a lot of organizations don't think of kids and youth as having money. A lot of young people don't think of themselves as having money, but $3 in our project can save a classroom-sized area of rainforest. So diminishing the importance of these small donations is not really, it's not helpful. So we really try to advocate for these small donations as important and impactful. A lot of our youth council members and youth that are connected with us, but not on the council, have done individual fundraisers. Selena, you're going to speak with, she sold her secondhand clothes that were, high-end designer clothes, but weren't getting enough wear. And so she sold them and donated the money to charity. We have a young youth council member named Justin Sather, who's obsessed with frogs. And he has been doing talks on TV, talks to schools. He has a major hustle just speaking about his passion and then getting donations in return. James McCullough, who's there in the bottom, we actually had a little sit down and said, okay, what are your strengths? If you don't feel like you can donate as much as you want to, let's think about your strengths and how you might be able to turn those into a fundraising opportunity. James is one of the top entomologists in the UK at only 17 years old. He's already identified 3,900 species of invertebrates in his home country. And so we took that skill and said, why don't you BioBlitz your neighbors' yards, go survey their gardens and count the bee species and see if they'll give you a donation in return. And so he's raised hundreds of pounds for Reserva just by doing what he loves. It's not always the sales, cookie sales or begging for donations that actually brings in your funding. It can just be pursuing your own passions. For Joe, that's running. He ran 45 miles. And because of the publicity he got out of it, he was able to raise close to $6,000 that was split for two charities, including us. We also work together as a group. So once we have this volunteer base, we work together and design group-led activities. We held an Instagram Live concert for conservation. Some of you may have heard Olivia Rodrigo, especially recently. Last year, she came on our concert for conservation, and we raised over $2,000 just on $5, $10 Instagram Live donations. We held a run for the rainforest, which was kind of mirroring Joe's effort. And we held one in January. It raised about $2,000. And I'm just going to skip forward. We held another one just now, just recently, and we raised enough to protect 40 acres of cloud forest habitat, close to $30,000 of impact. So it was just a virtual online run where we wanted to have a fundraising event that was really low impact on our time. And so we sold run packets, for lack of a better word, virtually, and people could download them, print out a little race bib, go for a run, and they paid $15 to participate. It was all virtual, and they got an automatic receipt, so it was like automatically through a website. And so it was very little effort on our part in order to have a massive impact. And I think that's where we're going to try to move forward, is finding these types of events that don't require as much heavy lifting in order to have a large impact. So for example, like organizing a concert for Instagram, it took us 3 weeks of just messaging and emailing and organizing and sweating putting the live event together. A lot of work, and it raised about $2,000. And so thinking about where your time and energy goes into your fundraising is really important. And then the last thing I'll say before I bring on Selena is we don't always ask kids for money. And this is one of the more kind of creative ideas that we had, that how we could bring in funding from non-youth, like from businesses, and still consider that to empower youth. So we have this 1 million letters for nature campaign. And essentially we ask youth to write a letter saying what they love about nature, and then asking world governments to commit to protecting our last wild places before it's too late. Especially right now, we're trying to promote 30 by 30, protecting 30% of our planet by 2030. And so we received support for this campaign from National Geographic Campaign for Nature. And when we bring on Paul in just a little bit, we'll talk about how Rewriting Extinction is supporting this campaign as well. But essentially what this allows us to do is involve kids and youth who are living in areas where maybe they don't have access to money at all. Maybe they don't have access to a credit card to even send in a donation. A lot of these kids really want to help, and they deserve to be able to make a tangible impact. And so they write a letter, and then with money that we receive from groups like Rewriting Extinction, or from adult donors who love what we're doing and want to help, but know that they're not under 26. That goes into our conservation match fund. And then we can run these youth empowerment programs where we match these letters with real money toward conservation. So I hope that's helpful to some of you in the audience who might have your own organization. Hopefully it sparks a thought about something you might be able to do. It's, you know, thinking outside of the box a little bit has been really helpful for us. So if you can screenshot this, I always end a talk, and you should definitely do the same, with the how you can actually help us. This talk isn't about that. This talk is about how we can help you. But I always try to end with all of the action items that someone can do to get involved. But I'm actually going to stop sharing, and so we can bring on Selena. Oh, okay.
Hello.
Hello. So, all right, here we go. I'm just going to quickly answer some of these questions that are in the chat. Sure. Okay, one of them, out of curiosity, what counts as youth? Well, we say 26 and under, but we're not carding. So there are at the UN, youth is 35 and under. And in the US, if you're 35 and you say you're youth, people are going to laugh at you. So it's really, it's all relative. And so if someone's 27 and they feel like they are youth, they can donate. It's fine. It's more about getting people who feel like they are in this category that's not really invited into conservation in this way, to feel like they have a platform for them. So Selena, I'm curious about the reason that your fundraiser was so interesting to me was that it brought in this group of people who might not have actually heard of this kind of work before, or really cared about it or thought about their impact before. Can you share a little bit about why you chose to use fashion as kind of your superpower?
Yeah. Well, just to introduce everybody to what I do, I am a tropical forest ecologist and a conservation photographer. So I photograph wildlife and environmental stories, and I'm also doing research as a biologist right now. But my family are not at all like in the nature world, and I actually grew up a chunk of my teenage years in Milan. And so I was exposed to, you know, Fashion Week, and then also like my mother is very involved in the fashion world, and I just thought, you know, so much of our perceptions of beauty in the world of art and fashion are shaped by nature. And quite often, you know, I attend fashion related events, and I, you know, introduce myself as a biologist and a conservationist, and people are always intrigued, and people are always, oh, I've always wanted to help or get involved, but I don't know how, or and they don't. And quite often in any new situation, when you want to try something new, it's always easier if you know somebody personally, or if there's like a really easy way for you to get involved. Because if you're new to something, like even if it is the most welcoming industry, a welcoming world, which conservation kind of is, you know, we want everybody to get involved, there's still this kind of, I guess, nervousness. And so with a lot of the fundraising that I do with Reserva, but also just education and giving talks and trying to expose different groups of people to the world of conservation and nature. Because, you know, I show my photography, and I print my photography as fine art prints as well. And those, I try to get those out to different communities and different groups of people rather than just preaching to the choir. And also financially, those groups of people tend to be, you know, have more disposable income and are more than willing to share that for conservation. So that's kind of why I got involved in trying to bring the overlap of fashion and beauty and art into the world of conservation and nature. And so fundraising through it's either through online sales or secondhand clothing, because there's so many online platforms now for that, like Depop and Vestia Collective and things like that. But also just directly engaging with people at events, and things like that.
Selena, if there is a website or a platform that you like to use, could you drop a link in the chat when this is
Yeah, sure.
done? Because I have tons of secondhand clothes and stuff, and I actually wouldn't really know where to start with
Yeah.
selling them. I know we have a platform called Nextdoor. I'm not sure if you have that there.
I'm not sure yet. I just use like Depop is so popular because it's almost like social media but for secondhand clothing. So, people can like your stuff and there's a similar algorithm to social media. But then if you just publicize the fact that, all of the proceeds will be going towards rainforest conservation, people are more likely to want to buy your clothes because it's not only are they getting your like cool new clothes out of it, but they also get to support something um, bigger than themselves.
So you haven't just led your own fundraiser. You've also participated in some of the fundraisers that other youth council members have led. And we've had so many different types of fundraisers that have involved young people. Sorry to put you on the spot, but can you think of one that you thought was particularly effective that, maybe some of the people watching might be able to steal and go try for themselves?
Well, you mentioned most of the key ones that the youth council from Reserva have done, but I can bring in some ideas from outside of the youth council.
Sure.
So one of my best friends is a chef, and he runs well, before COVID, he ran a weekly supper club, and every week would cook enough food for around 30 people, and everyone would pay a flat fee that would cover the cost of the ingredients, and then also cover a donation to a charity of choice for each week. And he loved to cook in his own time. So just by bringing people together and doing what he loved, he was able to raise hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a weekly basis, for charity. And then also, I mean, I think just as youth, we often think about social media and influencers and things like that to bring into the world of fundraising and conservation. But a lot of it is quite like, at least for me, as a photographer and visual storyteller, it's quite based on Instagram and Facebook. And I know that a lot of a lot of our fundraisers are through like Facebook fundraisers, and they do really well.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll add something to that. One of the really cool things about Facebook and Instagram is they actually cover all the processing fees. So it's technically the most efficient way you can fundraise for your organization, because not only like PayPal Giving Fund, which is the platform that's used for like GoFundMe, not only do they send the acknowledgments for you, but they also don't even take out the credit card fees. They pay them for you. So if you want literally 100% of your donations to come to you, it'll take a month because they kind of wait a month to send it to you. But use Facebook or Instagram fundraisers. I personally have found that Facebook works a lot better. I'm not sure if it's because the demographic that's on Facebook tends to be a little bit older and maybe more used to giving, but I think Instagram is important as well because the Instagram lives, I think, have done really well. We always get donations on Instagram lives. Instagram story posts are total flunk. I don't think it's so easy to tap through a story and be like, nah, I'm not going to donate right now. I don't think those really work.
Yeah,
But
I think with Facebook, it's quite personal because they're your
yeah,
friends, where Instagram can be quite, I have a public account, so it's open. But Instagram recently added, like within the last month or two, they added a feature where any person can host a fundraiser and on a given post. And so you can post on
yeah,
Instagram and it'll have a little like measuring thing to
yeah.
show how close you are to your goal. And that does make it slightly more personal because you can reach out to your friends and ask them to help you. Um, but I was going to say that we rely a lot on like Instagram and Facebook, and now of course TikTok. Although I'm not entirely sure whether TikTok has like a mechanism for fundraising, but I also think that it's really would be really helpful for organizations to like partner with certain, maybe not influencers, but YouTubers, or people who are on YouTube, or people who are on Twitch, which is like a gaming live stream thing. And so I don't like, just an example, some YouTubers who have millions of subscribers, they do things like, oh, I've just reached, I think it was Mr. Beast a couple of years ago, I've reached 20 million subscribers, and people on Reddit challenge them to raise $20 million to plant trees. And I think the fan base is just much more active on YouTube and Twitch and Reddits and things like that. So people get involved in and what Mr. Beast raised $5 million in under 48 hours. And 1.75 million of that was from YouTube alone, which like broke tons of records. So it's just that, like, tapping into youth and this world is definitely an enormous opportunity that I think people who have been in the industry for a really long time, or a lot of bigger organizations can neglect.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Well, Selena, thank you so much for jumping on, and really appreciate you sharing with us. And I want to introduce Paul Goodenough, who is one of our new partners and the founder of Rewriting Extinction. And as you can see from his background, he is involved in the in the comic world. And Paul, if you can share a little bit about yourself. And then I gave a little intro to Rewriting Extinction, but I'd love to hear why for you it was important to create something that was a collaborative funding model, and not, you didn't create your own organization to solve extinction. You decided to fund others. And I want to hear more about that decision.
Yeah, well, I think Selena actually kind of touched on it a minute ago. By one of the things that's always moved me is the complexity of environmental matters and the amount of noise that happens around fundraising and environmental concerns, and obviously rainforests amongst that as well, is quite complex from the outside perspective. So what I wanted to do was not make another thing, another sort of distraction to pull away from people like yourselves who are doing such great work. So my initial position was to try and come at this and find all the best players, all the people who had specialisms and expertise in certain areas, and then facilitate money and interest and basic awareness in what they're doing, rather than try to take away from it, if that makes some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to, should I screen share and just kind of show the website, just so that people know what the heck Rewriting Extinction is? And I just need to bring it up. Sorry. Okay, here we are. And then you can just sort of explain, share screen. Okay, hopefully people can see this. So walk us through, what is it?
So, okay, so pulling right back. So I've done a lot of work with charities and big corporates, organizations, NGOs. And as part of my role, what I've done is I've been looking at what we call donor paralysis, and which is looking at the reason why people don't donate or don't take actions towards environmental matters, specifically in this case. And what I found is that it was very complex. And so what I wanted to try and do was take all of these different environmental solutions and the issues and simplify them. And the best method I know of doing that from my own background is by comics. So what the whole project is around are 300 of us from across the planet. And what we're doing is we're creating stories that help to describe how environmental solutions can lead to a better world. In terms of the website and what you're looking at now, what that does, that comprises of all of the different creators we have on board. You can see quite a few of them on screen there. And also comprises of the 7 projects and charities who are benefiting from this project. And those 7, well, obviously, you know it very well, Callie, being from Reserva, but those 7 have each different specialisms, different places they work, both physically in location and region, but also different ways of tackling the biodiversity crisis. And so from my and our point, what we did is we looked at the way in which we could really try to make a big dent in how extinction is taking 200 species a day from us. And that forms, from our point of view, or from at least from my point of view, that's a 3-point plan. Number one is changing the laws and the business practices. So systemic change. What are the things that the human race does that is driving species to extinction? And we challenge those with Greenpeace, who you have on screen right now. The second piece, which of course you're very involved in, which is protecting those really highly biodiverse areas, those places where are the last refuge and the most biodiverse spots on the planet. They need to be protected. If we don't protect them, we're all going to be in terrible trouble. And that's with obviously yourselves and World Land Trust. And the third piece is around restoration, and specifically what we're not doing. We're not trying to protect, for example, the elephant or the white rhino. What we're trying to do and what we're aiming to do is we are saving the ecosystems they live in. So we're looking at everything right down to the lowest possible part of the food chain, from insects and flora and fauna right up to the apex predators. Because if you save the ecosystem, you'll save hundreds of species, not just one or two.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about the actual mechanism behind this, because this all sounds awesome. It sounds simple. You raise some money, great, and then you give it to the charity. In reality, there's a lot of, I'm going to stop sharing here. In reality, there's a lot that goes into that behind the scenes, and it can be really hard to start out on that journey. And so there may be people in this audience that are, you know, who are trying to find an innovative kind of solution like this to fundraising. Maybe they want to team up with some other nonprofits that work in a similar area to do something like this. And so what have been some of the stumbling blocks for you of how to actually raise this money?
Well, we're very early on in terms of our journey. We only launched last week, and that's with a soft launch with Cara Delevingne's comic. So we're going for 12 months. Each week we're publishing and putting a story out online, and that's our mechanism. Our mechanism is via comics to a social media audience, and then using that as a way of enticing people in, like Selena was saying, also working with influencers, storytellers, artists, musicians, and so on. So in terms of the raising money piece, we're very early in the process right now. But in terms of the answer to your question about how it works and some of the complexities around working with a number of charities, I think you probably know far better than I do, but there is a whole thing around, for example, donations. You know, donations in the UK, you have a thing called gift aid, which is a way that when a donation comes in, you can actually get extra percentage on top of that that's given by the government. So you need a UK fiscal sponsor to actually take that money in and to pay the charities. It's different, of course, in the United States. So you need a different fiscal sponsor in the United States. And then the rest of the world is different again. And going to actually Celine's point earlier about and your point actually about the Facebook and Instagram donate buttons, that's really difficult for us because we have to make a choice. We have to decide, is it going to be the UK? We're going to put it through that fiscal sponsor, which will cost us a certain amount, or you go for US or rest of world. And you've got to make some quite big judgments on where you think the cash is going to come in, because it will put people off if they know they don't get tax efficiency off the back of their donation. That, of course, is a kind of a bit of a demoralizer for some people. So yeah, there's that. I mean, you can speak very well to the complexities of working with, as we do, a commercial co-venture as well. So on our project, we've got both the big online campaign, and we have a book, an anthology we're going to be announcing shortly. That's a commercial co-venture, and working with different charities and the way in which each of them can take money and actually be in receipt of commercially generated funds. It's also quite complex.
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. So this two-pronged project to support us and support everyone else. The first set of donations that are coming in online, that's very simple for us. It's the money, as you said, is coming into a fiscal sponsor, one in the US, one in the UK, and the money from there will be, they're the ones who are accepting donations, which means it's their responsibility to acknowledge donors for their support. And then they just give us a grant. They just say, congratulations, here's all of your funding. That's super simple for a nonprofit to accept a grant. There's very little that you need to do around that administratively. However, on the other side of this project, being a commercial co-venture, for anyone watching who's not familiar with that term, what that means is that a nonprofit, a charity, has decided to go in on a venture with a for-profit. In this case, it's a publishing company in the UK. And that company is going to be advertising, whether it's a product or a service, and saying a percentage of our sales will be going to this charity. Now, that's awesome for the charity, but it also means for the for-profit entity that they are going to be making more because of that. Like, people are going to feel good buying this book because they know it's going to save land. Now, where it gets tricky is that some jerk at some point, sometime, took advantage of that and said, yeah, I'm totally going to give money to charity, and then didn't do it. And so the US government has some serious rules and regulations around regulating when you can say that and what exactly you have to say. And a lot of states require that you register with them to make sure that they can check out and hold you accountable, like check out that this charity is legit, and that they are a legit, like an actual charity. And then also check out that you are actually giving the amount of money that you say. So it's actually incredibly difficult to work with a company to get a percentage of their sales if they're advertising it. If they're not advertising it, if they're just saying, here's a book, and then on the back end, they're like, hey guys, we sold this book, thought you'd like to have some of the money. There are no requirements about that because they're not making any extra money because because they're doing something good. So what we had to do to get set up for this commercial co-venture thing is you have to have a specific set of words and statements in your special contract. That mainly the onus is on the for-profit entity to make sure that they are in good standing with all the states and they're following on all the rules. But as the nonprofit as well, you have to make sure that you are in compliance with all the states. And in the US, that means you have to register to solicit charitable donations in about, I think it's 41 states require you to be registered. And that's extremely time consuming. And so if you are a nonprofit that isn't yet set up to be able to spend a few hundred hours registering for charitable solicitation in all the states, or to pay around $6,000 to have someone do it for you, and all those state fees add up to around $3,000, just for anyone who's watching and thinking of doing this. That's how you get set up to be allowed to ask for donations from Iowa and New York and Florida and Virginia. So if you're not set up for that, there are two options. One, run the risk, do it anyway. Don't tell them I told you so. And just, if you're not making a ton of money, the odds that someone's gonna go after you for it are pretty low. Or see if you can work something out with the for-profit entity where they don't actually advertise that they're giving you money. So that's a fun little window into that. If anyone has questions for Paul, please drop them in the chat. I'm really excited that we were just joined by Javier Roballo. And so Javier, now the whole gang is here. Hello.
Hello, Callie.
Hello. So, there are questions in the Q&A pop up. Javier, before I get to you, I do want to look at the Q&A just to make sure that we're getting these questions done. Which country is the best to register an organization, UK or USA? Wow. Okay. So that's a very tricky question. I think it depends. I mean, I'd love to hear your guys' opinion. I think it depends on who your audience is. If you are an international organization like us, we registered in the US. That's just because that's where I live, and you have to have someone who's, you know, legally residing somewhere, and it made the most sense for us to do it there. We have wondered if down the line, if we find that it's preventing us from getting donations from the UK, then we may wind up making a second organization in the UK. Right now, what's interesting is that UK donors, they don't always, you know, ask for gift aid and don't always care about gift aid. And so I think there's less hesitancy from UK donors to donate to a US organization, because it's no benefit to them to donate to a charity. It's just a benefit to the organization to get gift aid. Whereas in the US, a lot of people are unwilling to donate to a charity if they're not going to get a tax break for it. So I guess I would say if it's a toss up for you, probably the US. What do you, Paul, what do you think, Selena? Love to hear your thoughts.
I would just very quickly, I just jump in. So I totally agree with you. In terms of the complexity of UK to US, I think that I can, with hand on heart, say the US was really simple. The UK was not at all.
Really?
No. There's a whole thing, a whole kind of like horror story, battle scars. I can start pouring out to you if you want, around the amount of time and effort and headache that I went to, and I've still going through, in kind of dealing with how the UK handles charitable donations and charities. The Charities Commission over here is just incredibly overworked, and there's been, over the last sort of at least 10 to 20 years, been quite a proliferation of people making lots of charities for smaller things like events and one-off occurrences, and that has meant that there's been quite a kickback to try and stop new charities, to try and stop fiscal sponsors just hoovering up everybody. So yeah, I mean, from just my own perspective, I would say Callie's absolutely right. You know, the UK donors, although they do get tax breaks, not many people are ever going to really fill that form out. So it's US for me.
Okay. Selena, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I have very little experience in this world, but as someone who has to work internationally and quite often like work with people who are donating from outside of the UK and the US, I think it's also just US sounds, it's easier for, and it's less detriment to the donor. Yeah.
Okay. So I also want to answer Shelley's question. This is going backward. How did you find your youth council members, and do you meet often? So this is kind of a funny question, because when we started 2 years ago, it was literally just me, Bella Lack, and then after Bella, like 10 youth council members or something who answered a tweet. So our first set of youth council members literally came from Bella's Twitter account. And we met really like a group, deciding what's our name, what's our color scheme, what's our brand, what's our business plan, and really worked on it together. But now it's a little bit more formalized. I'll let everyone hear in on the secret, because we don't have the capacity to accept applications. We just don't. Everyone right now is volunteer, and we just not only do I not feel like I have the time to accept applications and read through them, but I don't want to reject anyone who wants to help. Are you kidding? So at the moment, our youth council is entirely made up of people who find us and reach out and say, this looks like something I really want to be involved with. Is there any way that I could, chat? And we have a call, and I talk about what our youth council does and ask if that's of interest to them. Most of our youth council members, this is the main thing that they do. A lot of them, a few of them have other organizations that they work with, but it is kind of time consuming on our end. So like Selena is an ambassador for Panthera, and works with several others. So, but it is kind of time consuming. So I like to be approached by potential youth council members, because it shows that it kind of self-selects for people who have initiative and who think that they have the time to be part of something. And then we meet monthly with Javier to hear updates from the ground, to share updates on fundraising, and generally talk about organization, where we are with administrative stuff. Everyone is in the loop on everything, the whole nitty-gritty of the organization. So we meet monthly, and then we actually break into committees, and those committees of youth council members, which are led by officers on the youth council, those meet kind of on an ad hoc basis. Some of them meet weekly or bi-weekly. So with that, I'd love to bring up Javier, and as he gets his camera on, I will share one very exciting fundraising update that we're going to put on Instagram as soon as I'm off this call, and announce. With the successful Run for the Rainforest fundraiser that we just had, we have been, working for the last almost 2 years, year and a half, on fundraising for this project that Javier runs at Dracula Reserve. And after the completion of this Run for the Rainforest project, and this last 40 acres that we were able to protect, we have officially hit our fundraising goal. And it's our first fundraising goal, and it's so exciting to be able to say we finally hit it. So we have raised all the funds we need to be able to create the world's first entirely youth-funded nature reserve with Javier at Dracula Reserve. And so there's still more steps to do to get that, get it all done, but the fundraising goal is there. So stay tuned on our Instagram, which is at Reserva YLT, to hear more about that. And thanks in the chat. So with that, Javier, I want to bring you up and talk about all this fundraising that we've been doing. Where is it actually going? What are your areas of greatest need when you're developing a project budget? Obviously, there's the land purchase, but there's also rangers, there's signs, there's invasive species monitoring, there's research that needs to be done. What are the areas that you have the easiest time getting funds for, and the things that are hardest to fund?
Well, first, hello, everybody, and congratulations, Reserva. With the amount of time that you are working, you're showing us what is the real force to save nature, and is in the people that is in charge of nature right now, that is youth people. And that's where we need to put more and more efforts every single day. And to answer your question, depend. If you are a huge reserve and a huge national park, you don't need to grow and continue growing as a protected area. But in our case, on the middle of the world, on the Andes, if you cross one mountain to another, just mountain ridge, you will have a different amount of diversity. And discovering these diversity patterns is one of the main things that we need to do. And before that we start a grant or another type of fundraising activity, we need to understand our area, our plots, our places, the places that we want to protect, because we are not choosing every single piece of land that we want to have or that looks nice to have. We need to first to base our decisions in science. So the first thing that we need to do, and to look for funds, it's to establish the scientific reasons to protect one piece of land. The second thing is to cover with some biological meanings as connection, as ecological values, as water protection, and other stuff. And all these things are impossible to fund without unrestricted funds. Funds that can be to pay a car, or to pay a DNA test to understand what is the genetical position of one species that we recorded, but we don't know really if it's new or is not new. Time to our team, checking for boundaries, checking for the situation with the neighbors. That's some of the money that we don't have, and it's super hard to discover for some sources, grants, or organizations that help us to organize land purchases situation. So when we start looking for to protect one place, the first thing is how we pay all the research that we need to do before to establish it, priorities on this thing. So that's the main thing. We don't have funds to do all this stuff, so we are trying to do other type of things, and we are trying to be connected with other organizations, as the Natural Science Museum of Ecuador, the INABIO, the Instituto Nacional de Biodiversidad. So we have the chance to come with the researchers and reduce the amount of time looking for all the spectrum of species, and we focus our attention on the weird things, on the rare species, or on the things that just appear on our face and are different. So we use experts, we use people with a lot of abilities, and our park guards are going to be trained during this process with this type of things. So that's the baseline to answer your question.
So what are, we've been supporting EcoMinga through with funds for a project, and in that project you kind of encapsulate a percentage of some ranger salaries that are needed, some of that research that's needed, some of the boundary identification that's needed. You can wrap that up into a project, but not everything you do is a project. So what are your sources as an international NGO, being an Ecuadorian NGO? What are your sources of funding just to carry on, or is it all based into these bundled projects?
Depend on the type of grants that we can apply, depend also on the donors. Sometimes we have this ability to pay for all the needs through people who are our friends, that are friends of the organization, EcoMinga friends, that wants to give some money to continue this work. Sometimes we have the attention of people who help us in previous processes, and sometimes the money appear just like magic in our accounts. And sometimes is the reason it's after the people help us with some money to make our conservation work. We are using our scientific ability to give names as a big thank you to the people that is helping us. And sometimes we just name some of the new species that we have to the people or organizations that help on this process. And sometimes we are very lucky to have a very good answer of people donating some money, unrestricted funds that help us to continue our work. So it's another way how the species that we are saving said thank you to the people that is helping us to save their own.
So talking about innovative fundraising mechanisms, which I think is supposed to be the title of this talk, about 2 years ago, you participated in Rainforest Trust's Species Legacy Auction. You donated, I think, 4 species to the auction, where they got to auction off the naming rights, and then those funds went back to support conservation. And but as it sounds kind of simple, like, oh, you buy right to name a species, money goes to the place, all good. And maybe that's something that some of the viewers might have the opportunity to do. Can you talk about some of the really difficult things about that? Like what's hard about auctioning off the naming rights to a species?
Yeah, well, the first thing is to be related with somebody with a lot of experience, to organize, to join people, and to conduct all the action activity. That's the first thing, and that's something that is very expensive in terms of time, in terms of connections, in terms of investments, agreements related with how the money is going to be used. And on the back, to offer one new species as a valid species is a process that takes some time. And if if it's the last species that we discover in one place and you have 100% of certain that is not another species on the area, and you have all the researchers on your side and nobody else in the world is going to take the attention of the same species to just use it or to show the people before you're 100% free that everything is ready and you can offer to somebody one species with 100% of accuracy that nobody else is going to take the same species and name before you in honor to somebody else. That's the first thing. And in our situation in Ecuador, some of the places where we are working during the last years with a lot more than 12 species published during the last 10 years, also keep the attention of other researchers and other groups of scientists that also want to continue and use these places as a discovery resource. So we are not the authority on Ecuador to say, no, you cannot come and collect the samples here. We are the landowners. We can provide rights to the people to go inside our areas, but researchers can go, inclusive without our permission, and try to take advantage from the work that we are doing and to the specimens that are in the museums to move faster than we can move. So that's one of the main risks.
One of the main risks is that someone might discover this species before you get the chance to actually name it after the person. And if they've just given you $20,000 to name this species and someone beats you to the punch, then that's really complicated. And then I guess the other main issue would be, what part of the process do they provide you funding to name the species? Is it guaranteed that the species is going to be accepted and published?
Well, no, and that's the other side. First, we are asking to the people that accept one species to give us the money only when the species is published, not before, because it's a high risk that the species can be rejected by the magazine, that the results of DNA analysis are not strong enough, or then other people, for example, in our case, a Colombian group can publish the species before us. So to reduce the amount of chances of to lose a species, we are trying to work in larger groups of researchers from a wide amount of institutions. We work with Colombian universities, Brazilian people, Ecuadorian people, and we try to have a large group of researchers involved on these things. But anyway, it's not a guarantee. There are people who will provide the review or comments and other stuff also can reject the species. And sometimes the parts that are checking if the species is valid or not, at the end of the day can say, no, it's not enough evidence. You need to continue working more, and please just review the sister species. And it's the case of one of the species that we're working. The sister species is, we don't know where is it. It's not herbarium collections. It's not in any kind of life collections. It's not on botanical gardens. All the evidence that we have that the main paper that valid the species is not enough to the magazine. So we need to start trying to discover the previous species, the first species, the sister species of our new species, to have enough evidence. And that's very expensive in terms of time. And it's like try to discover another new species on this case. And that may make more complicated all the situation.
So we only have a couple minutes left before this wraps up. And to the attendees who have stuck around, thank you so much. But I think that one of the things that has been most exciting to me is to see how being affiliated with Reserva, for example, or with Rainforest Trust, as a local organization and country, how being part of these efforts that we're doing, whether it's the Million Letters campaign or bringing young people directly into your expeditions, or with Rainforest Trust to the Species Legacy, and now Rewriting Extinction, with Selena's, talking about the reserve. There's so much extra exposure. I'm curious to know how that has actually affected you from an organizational standpoint. How is that? Has it helped? Is it distracting?
It's new and fresh, and and it's very useful to keep EcoMinga on a different level of participation, and it's more people and more people involved. I think EcoMinga is learning more about the relationship with Reserva, and looking how this amount of people it's providing us more options than working alone. Exposition, of course, is something important, but all the criteria that you have and promote through Reserva also it's impacting youth people in Ecuador, and that's something that we really need. We need to have all these effort made it locally, and it's quite hard, especially during the last year with all this disconnection with people and the field and the local communities. It's quite hard. So having all this energy of Reserva, keeping in mind that youth people, it's the real actors and the real defenders of the planet. It's important to just to keep on the ground with youth people and pass all the things that we know to the next generation. Reserva has the road that we can continue, how we will continue, where we will continue, and how the youth people, it's the real present of conservation. EcoMinga added during the last year 2 youth people to the board, and we know that the people that we include on the board, they don't have a lot of experience, they don't have a lot of capacity to change the world with one hand, but we know that we are passing all this responsibility to the next generation, and they will give us a lot, and we will try to show as much as we can to continue the philosophy and to continue the our compromise with the biodiversity. And that's something that we really learn. To me, is more important how, as human, as organizations, we are partners in all the different levels, and how our talks can help us to open our eyes and to see that we are not alone, that in this world we are more people, more minds, brilliant minds, and beautiful ideas as promoted through these relationships. And I think that's the main thing.
Callie, you're muted.
Thanks. One of the things that has made, given me so much happiness is how much you have embraced and carried forward this idea of youth empowerment, and bringing on Natalia and Marco onto your board of directors, as it just really shows that you're an organization that puts your money where your mouth is, and you really practice what you preach. All the various analogies that you can use for that, you do it. So thank you so much for being here. If there are any questions.
I have a question actually, but it might be not don't forget of time, Callie.
Yeah, no, we do.
It's actually a question for Selena. It was just something that we've been sort of kind of knocking around our heads over it here at Rewriting Extinction. One of the things, speaking to your point about the power of TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, people out there generating content, one of the ideas that we had, because of the nature of us writing stories and making art, was to basically put a competition out there online where people can actually generate stories, art, videos there's a competition that they would win for it, we could then say, look, well, this piece of the land, we're not going to name after you. We're not going to basically try and make this piece of land have ownership for you. But what we will do is we will take some art there, or we'll take something and give you a photograph or video of that piece of land that you have, that your competition has helped to purchase. And I just wondered kind of if that resonated with you and if you thought that might just activate some people.
Absolutely. I think so many of these initiatives that ask for creative engagement and creative input from people, because that's kind of a lot of, I guess, the limiting factor nowadays with trying to reach out to people is you're just kind of releasing something into the ether and hoping that people will look at it. And nowadays with attention spans being very short, and and also people's capacities to actually really engage with something just by looking at it online and social media, it's so easy to just scroll past something. So asking for creative input and opening that door, and especially for young people, I mean, it's people are always surprised by the I guess the limitations, like confidence. Young people who, especially artists in the creative industry, quite hesitant to put their work out there, and doing so in a welcoming way that also allows for engagement on a matter of environmental importance, and that could, bring in funds and things like that. I think it's a fantastic idea. And yeah, just tapping into creativity, I feel like that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just to sort of say to that, I mean, it was never my intention, our intention, for us to be kind of the storytellers for the world. It was just be all of us are creating stories. So stories that speak to you, stories that speak to people in and around your life, everybody. So yeah, it just kind of really resonates. And you're absolutely right. I guess what we try and need to do is make sure that everyone feels welcome, and everybody isn't there to be judged on the final piece. It's what comes from your heart and how powerful the thing is, rather than necessarily the kind of the architectural technique in drawing. What does this say?
Exactly, yeah. And like I'm a storyteller, I'm a photographer, and so it's absolutely right that it's about the story. I always tell people who are starting out, and a lot of people come and ask, oh, how can I get involved in wildlife photography? I don't have the background, I don't have the research degree, I don't have it doesn't matter. It's about how you can tell a story, and so much of engaging people, and especially young people around the world, with the issue of the environment. And it's like what you said, it's so complex. Climate change, the ecological crisis, the biodiversity crisis, these are enormous global abstract issues. And I mean, also just thinking in geological time rather than in the time of a human lifetime. It's really through creativity and through art and through literature and through photography that you can communicate these issues on a level that engages with an individual in an emotional and intimate way. And so making sure that everyone feels welcome. And I want to bring up what Callie mentioned with the 1 million letters campaign. Like, that's why I wanted to join Reserva, the 1 million letters campaign, because it's such a fantastic initiative. It's asking for people's input, it's asking for people to engage and tell us why they love nature, and it's including kids all over the world, regardless of background, regardless of financial ability, to contribute, and telling them, look, you may not have the money, but if you have an idea, if you have the passion, if you have a coloring pen and a pencil, then you can help save a little patch of forest. And I think that's the most beautiful thing that you can give to a young person anywhere, the agency and ability to contribute to something as big and complex as the biodiversity crisis.
Well, I couldn't have wrapped that up any better. So on that note, I have dropped a few Instagram handles in there. Selena, I think yours is at Selena XCHIEN.
There you go.
That, and mine is Callie Broaddus. So Instagram is definitely the best way to connect with all of us. Thank you very much for coming. I promised them that I would end on time, and we've done exactly that. So thank you to everyone who has come. Please do get involved, reach out. look for more from Rewriting Extinction, Dracula Reserve, and Reserva, of course. And feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Paul, Selena, Javier. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.